And welcome back to another podcast of Missionary Life. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Sarita. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm so excited you're here. It's been way too long since we caught up. This
Yes.
episode, we are going to be talking about leaving well. And so, this is something that Naomi is very passionate about. She is passionate about accountability and leadership effectiveness. And after living across the U.S., her family moved overseas for 4 years in both India, Singapore, and after returning, they've traipsed their way through Florida, Virginia, Ohio, and Nebraska, and now live in Florida. Naomi consults individuals and organizations on the concept and framework of leaving well, a practice for navigating workplace transitions. So I'm just excited to jump in because I know this is such an important topic for missionaries. I know that many of us, we have these transitions where we have to leave the field either because we're forced to due to illness or because we need to leave for our own well-being or our children's well-being. And so it's really something that I want to help missionaries navigate well. And I know that you are all about that.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting too because thinking about ways that we can just normalize this is
Yes.
really important. And so I'm glad for this conversation.
Yes, me too. So let's just jump right in. So, Naomi, you and I met actually because you used to run a group called I Am a Triangle, and that's how we first connected. And I was looking for support for other missionaries and expats who had been through the reentry process. And we connected on there, and it was super helpful for me to connect with other people who had similar experiences to mine. And so, can you talk about what it means to be a triangle in the missionary expat experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So the concept of I'm a triangle actually came from Mission Training International. So my mom was a missionary in Kenya and had attended a debrief retreat that MTI hosted.
Mm-hmm.
And while they didn't have anything documented about it, they talked during the debrief about the concept of being a circle, a square, and a triangle. And the geometric puzzle of that doesn't make any sense. But generally, it is that you are a circle in
Mm-hmm.
your own passport country. And so the circle culture is something that you are very familiar with: food, celebrations, holidays, politics, all of those things. When you go to another country, that is a square culture. And so
Yeah.
you are very much not aware of those cultures, food, celebrations, all those things. The longer that you stay in square culture or square society, you start to blend a little bit into that society, but you can never really become square and you can never lose your circleness. And so the idea that was shared at this debrief retreat is that you become a triangle, something
Yes.
completely new. It's very similar to the concept of third culture kids and
Yes.
that third culture that happens when you blend two cultures together. The beauty about the I'm a Triangle concept is that at the time it was really popular because no one was really talking about reentry and repatriation.
Mm,
And so I think the idea that struck the chord with so many people is, well, if you're a triangle, what happens when you move back home? What
mm,
happens when you move back into that circle culture? And so I think it resonated with so many folks because we weren't talking about it openly. And so a
yeah.
lot of responses that I got. So what I did was publish a blog post based on that story,
Mm-hmm.
and it largely exploded.
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds of people emailed me to say that's how I feel. And so I Am a Triangle was born. It was hosted online in different capacities and spaces through 2018, which was when we sunset it. But I think that what I learned the most from the I'm a Triangle concept is that we're not alone. It's
Yeah.
not just us. Anything that we are feeling about our experience, whether it's in the mission field or as we're serving in expat spaces, there's someone else that's experienced it. That doesn't make us less special. It just should help us understand that there's someone else going through it, and we
Yeah.
can lean on others for support.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think that's such an important thing for missionaries and expats to understand is because when you come back, it does feel so isolating. You do feel so alone because you don't match up to the other people around you, that you're going to church with or going to the grocery store with, your friends. Like they can't really get and grasp your experience and how you feel so torn between these two different places. And so I think it's so important for that sense of community, for missionaries and expats. And yeah, it's like when you come back, you're like a hexagon or something. You're just like,
Well, not only do you feel that way, but sometimes you look that way. So like
Yeah.
sometimes even the act of existing from coming from where you've just been, whether it's local dress, or if you're covering for, because of that's the culture that it was in, jewelry. There's just all sorts of different ways that you can also just not even fit in with your
Yes.
surroundings. So yeah, it is something to be very aware of.
Yes. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal story of leaving the field and how you went through that and how you ended up processing that. And if you had this feeling of leaving well, or if you had a feeling of just wasn't the way that you wanted it to happen, can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So my husband and I were living at the time in Ohio, and we joke about this now because we only a couple of years ago talked to each other. We actually heard each other telling the story of us ending up overseas, and we were like, that's not the story I knew. The way my husband tells it, I was having a hard time in Ohio, which I was. I was having a hard time with the winters. I had just had our third child.
Mm,
Um, and I was seasonally depressed. He thought he could do something about that and get us kind of out of there and have a new opportunity. If you ask me, my husband's career was really important to him and to us as a
mm,
family as well. He had an opportunity to go overseas in the aviation industry. And I thought I was being a really good wife and support partner to say, of course, why not? Let's do
right.
this thing. So now that we've come together on our stories, we may not have gone if we had talked about it. But
Yeah.
he came home one day and said, let's go to India. And I said, okay, let's do it.
Mm.
Our kids at the time were 3, 6, and 14.
Wow. Such hard
We
ages
went
to
into
move.
it the hardest ages. I really feel like it's
Oh
the hardest
gosh.
ages. Um, I went into it with this feeling of almost reckless abandon and
Mm,
excitement and adventure. And what didn't match on the return was having those same feelings. It
yeah.
was more, I think, that we often downplay or we make it more of a negative when we're returning home or have to leave. And so that's one recommendation that I learned too late, is that in the leaving, you can have the same level of excitement and abandon and adventure and all of those things.
Mm,
So we went to New Delhi. We lived there for 3 years. I was not able to work, and so I did a lot of volunteering, threw myself into volunteering, loved it.
yeah.
And life was really, really good. We actually moved to India with the intention of living there forever. We sold our home, we sold all of our belongings, and really intended to live there. I got sick, and so did my husband,
Mm,
with chikungunya, um, and was having a really hard time with my health. It
yeah.
was something that doctors couldn't figure out. It was early in the chikungunya days. And so the recommendation from all of our healthcare professionals was that I needed to live somewhere healthier.
Yeah.
So I and the children moved to Singapore, and my husband stayed behind in New Delhi. And we did that for a year, with him coming to Singapore once a month, maybe for a
Oh,
weekend.
that's so hard.
And it's so hard. And in both of those locations, we had help. We had a great team of folks that were helping our family through hired relationships. But it wasn't enough. Our family was fracturing. It was just really challenging. And so when we made the decision to leave, it was very sudden. It was to, and not save our marriage. It wasn't anything drastic like that, but to
Right.
really make sure that our family unit stayed together and stayed whole and as healthy as possible. We made the decision to repatriate, and in 3 months we were back in the U.S. So it was very, very quick.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Wow. That's an incredible story. And you're right. Like, so often it is sickness, it is illness that forces us off the field, because sometimes we don't have access to the proper doctors, proper nutrition, different things that we need, naturopaths, people that can help us solve some of the complex health issues we can come off the field with. And so that's such a common reason that people have to leave. And so I want people to know that they're not alone in that. If they feel like a failure, like that's just not true. Like sometimes you have to prioritize your health, your kids' health, your marriage health, in order to survive, um, so, how do you feel like a person can know when it's time to leave and serving their mission overseas?
yeah, that's such a great question. I think that there's to me, it seems like there's probably three main categories. What we just talked about is a pressing reason, family
Yeah.
needs, health. Maybe there's something in your extended family that has happened and you need to return to take care of those things. Sometimes I think in that same like pressing needs category, for those that have children, if you're listening and you've got children, there are moments where whether it's schooling needs
Yeah.
or any special needs around learning or their own health, mental wellness, that needs to be a priority. I think that there's also kind of the gut feeling. You just
Yeah.
know it's time to go. If it's that things just aren't quite right, maybe it's that there's something new that you want to do and it's not going to
Mm.
be able to be in the same location that you are. The third reason I think I'm hoping to see more of this when the work is done,
Yeah.
when the intended purpose is completed. I think to have that be one of the reasons that it's time to leave, there needs to be more communication on the front end of what is my time here? When will
Yeah.
my part of this project come to a close? That can also help protect so much of the mental burnout that
Mm.
happens if there's more of an agreement on the front end of like this project, this service time will come to a close and have it be time limited. But I think those are the three things or three categories. I think it's really important to say that communication is underrated and underused.
Yeah.
We need to be in more communication with our loved ones around how everyone's feeling so that you don't get to that point where it's like, I had no idea that you were ready also.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Depending on your kiddos' ages and their awareness, they also are really, really smart and know when something might be time to wrap up. And there's this great book by Dr. Henry Cloud called Necessary Endings. And I
Mm.
think that is such a part of most of our cultures that we don't know how to even process endings. So then
Yeah.
we shy away from even saying it's time to wrap this up. The other thing I'll say here is what work was ours to start is not always ours to end.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point.
we're not always the best for everything. So sometimes someone else needs to come in and
Yeah.
do the next piece. So I think that's important to share also.
Those were great points. Yeah, I really struggled with knowing when it was time to leave, and essentially, I had done what I'd set out to do. I had built these rehabilitation homes for child soldiers and women in sex trafficking. And I really had been spending many years, 7 years pouring into my staff and my nationals. And the reality was, like, they actually could do the job without me. It was just that I didn't really want to let go. I didn't want to stop being necessary. I didn't want to stop having purpose and value. And, in some sense, as a 2 on the Enneagram, as a helper, I liked being needed. I liked being that one that solved all the emergencies and took people to the hospital. And the reality is sometimes, we have accomplished the work we set out to do, but we don't even realize it. We don't even acknowledge like everything that we've done. We set such high expectations. And I think what you said was so important, because if you can write down your goals, like, okay, is my goal to love people, or is my goal to raise a few national leaders? Is my goal to, get them where they're self-sustaining and they can do this on their own? Then once you've done that, you really can release it, and you can entrust it to them. But it is so hard. It is so hard to let go and release. But I think those are really important points.
Something that you just said brought up for me. So I keep a worthy work notebook,
Mm-hmm.
and in it I just jot down the big and the small things that I've accomplished through my time on a project or in a situation. That also can help you know when it's time to go. If you're
Yeah.
tracking the things along the way, um, that will help you. The other piece of it too is there's always going to be other ways that you can still be a part. So if your mission or your goal was to, I don't know, build so many wells or roofs on churches,
Mm-hmm.
what can you do if you're not the same person who is on the ground?
Right.
You could do fundraising, you could help with marketing and helping to share the mission and the work. So there's just
Yes.
always ways, I think, that you can step back from being the main person and then fall into more of a support role.
Yes, I love that you brought that up. That's actually what I did when I left for the next 3 years. I was
Mm.
basically, I'd always been fundraising. You're always fundraising, but I had basically stepped into more of a support role where I was fundraising and sending them resources and training and equipping them, and yeah, and that was helpful to have that time of transition where it wasn't just completely cut
Mhm.
off, and I could actually still
Yes.
help, and I still felt like I was a part of the program and the project. Eventually I did have to come out of it, but I did feel at that point in time that they had been equipped enough to have the stuff and carry it, in their hearts. And I
Yeah.
love what you said about listening to your gut, because I feel like so often we don't do that. We tend to over spiritualize things, like, oh my gosh, like if God doesn't send me a lightning bolt from the sky, and tell me to leave, then it's not time to go, whereas sometimes it can be, I remember for me, I was sitting out on my porch with my dogs at my feet. It was nighttime. There was mosquitoes. And I just had this sense of like, it's time to go now. And it was like a
Mhm.
whisper inside my soul. And I was like, God, is that you? But it was just this still small voice. And it was just a knowing. And even though my
Yeah.
desires resisted it because I wanted to stay, I thought I was going to live there forever. It was like, okay, like, my heart knows, my gut knows, and then now to deny this, to reject this, it would basically be to deny myself. And that just
Yeah.
means when you deny yourself, you just get sicker and sicker, you get worse because you're not living, in integrity with yourself.
Yeah. I think there's something that you brought up too with Enneagram types, and the folks that often end up in service roles are the ones that find it hardest to sit on their hands.
Yes.
And so I've always been really mindful for myself. I'm really quick. I'm an Enneagram 8,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm really quick to raise my hand, especially when I know that my fight for justice and my protection
Yes.
is what's needed at a project or in a program design or what have you.
Yeah, the eights
So I
get
raise
shit
my
done.
hand. Oh my gosh. Give us a
I know.
project, give us
Just,
something
you guys can
easy,
just
and
get
we
it
will
done.
go. Yes. So I raise my hand quickly and often. And I've been trying over the last 10 years or so to like, what would it look like to sit on my hands instead
Yeah.
and let someone else have the opportunity to raise their hand? So I think a lot of times we, especially when we're service oriented and service minded, we jump in. Who are we leaving out if we're always the one saying me?
Yeah.
And so that's another thing to just, I think, keep in mind. And it makes it a little easier then to process maybe it's time to go, knowing that you're offering the opportunity to others to carry forward the work. Um, it helps my mind anyway, a little
Yes,
bit.
yes. So I know you do a lot of work around this concept of leaving well. And so what are some of the ideas or values that you have, or processes that you go through in order to set yourself up to leave a country well, that you've loved and that's been your home? How do you do that in a way where you don't have so much regret?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a couple of very practical things that I would share. One of those is create a timeline. It's no different than an actual moving timeline where you need to understand what's the date you cut off your electricity, what's the date that you change your mailing address, what's the date you remove kids from school. That all has
Mm,
to be on a timeline. Otherwise, you'll do things too quickly or too late. And the same goes for leaving well.
yeah,
Map out once you've made the decision. When are you going to tell people? How are you going to tell people?
yeah,
When will you start to wrap up your work and do knowledge transfer? That's a really important part that people don't remember about leaving well.
yeah,
Often, when you've made the decision, your brain is detaching. You need to spend really solid time preparing for whoever comes behind you so
yes,
that you are helping welcome them into the role or into the thing. If the project's finished, though, there's also really beautiful leaving well that you can do to wrap up and leave almost a breadcrumb trail of the work that's been done.
mm-hmm,
So that's really important to have that timeline and that plan. Communication, again, is really, really important.
yes,
Um, Inviting people in to the conversation around it instead of just delivering the news.
mm,
There's really beautiful closing ceremonies and closing concepts that are really important, especially I think for missionaries and
yeah,
folks that are in service spaces, to invite the community in
mm-hmm,
to help with that leaving well process. There's a really great podcast episode that I did with someone named Jerry Jones,
mm-hmm.
who published beautiful blog posts about the concept of leaving well. And in it, he talks about ranking your friends. And I love this so much. And it sounds a little
You're
sassy.
first, you're second. It's very Mean Girls.
It's very mean girls, but his whole point is your time is valuable. So why would you give someone equal time who's number 20 on the list,
Right.
and then you might not have enough time for the number ones.
Mm,
So his mode of operating when leaving, and I really love it, is focus on the people that you need
yeah.
to have that relationship closed off the most. Um, the other thing I would say from setting yourself up um, practically is that we have always gone back to our favorite places. We've said goodbye
Yes.
to our service staff at restaurants that we love. We have left notes in books at libraries. We have written little notes on the inside of closet walls with our kids.
Yeah.
Saying goodbye to the place that you're leaving really helps set you up for the way that you say hello to the new place.
That's so good. Yeah, it's so important
Yeah.
in the grieving process to celebrate those wins and those victories, and to celebrate with the community, and to get together with them and say goodbye. And so we did that. We had a big celebration in Uganda, with music and dancing and chicken and soda, and all the kids and women were there, and I got
Yes.
to say goodbye, but they also got to share with me how I had impacted their lives. And
Mm,
that was so healing for me, because sometimes you don't see it, like you don't see the impact, that you are having on people's lives. And so when you actually get to hear it firsthand, it feels so validating, and so
yes.
healing to be like, wow, okay, God, you did all this work even though I didn't see it. And so now I feel like, okay, I can leave and I can embrace
Yes.
this next season. And we did the same thing. We said goodbye. We had a special place. We used to go camping in Kadepo, and it was near the Sudan border. And we went up there and camped and said goodbye to the land and the place that we loved and friends that we loved. And that was just so good for us. And another thing we did was we planned a return trip back. So we
Mm,
like basically said, okay, in a year we're going to come back and we're going to visit. And like having that kind of like out there on the calendar really helped us feel like, okay, we have something to look forward to now. It's not just like, it's just basically goodbye for now. It's not goodbye forever,
yes.
because when you think about saying goodbye forever, that's really devastating.
Yeah.
So those were just a few little things that helped us in our leaving process. And even though there was still a ton of grief, yeah, so that kind of leads me into my next question, in terms of when you land in this new alien place, are there ways that you think can make it a softer landing for people, where they can try to embrace this new place, this new culture, and not feel like such an alien, and where they can grieve well?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things. So I'll kind of toggle back and forth between grieving well and then also some kind of tips and resources for how to actually do the landing
Yeah,
piece. Um, I think knowing and just acknowledging that grief is part of it
yeah,
makes it feel like less of a burden. Knowing ahead of time that it's going to suck,
yeah.
it's going to be sad, and it follows. While grief from leaving a place, I don't want to compare to grief that comes from a loss of a person, but it follows the same trajectory, which is that
Yes.
you don't know when it will come and when it will rise up. If you are in a family unit, it's also really important to know that your grief cycle is not going to be the others. And so,
Mm,
especially if you're the primary caregiver or that falls on you, it's going to be even more of a burden for you. But just pay attention to those around you. When are they experiencing grief?
yes.
Especially for myself, when I landed, my husband went straight to work.
Yeah.
We landed
Yeah.
literally the next day, he was in the office.
Yeah.
And so I was aware of his processing. I thought he was fine. Nope, he just had a lot of things to distract him.
Yeah.
I was the one, quote unquote, stuck at home with the kids who were sad and who didn't want to go to school, who refused to go to school, one of
Mm,
them. Um, I think the other thing that's really, so this goes toggles into the resource or the tip. If you have kiddos, I think it's so important to talk about their comfort level and what they will share about what they've just left.
mm,
We had our youngest daughter. I got a call one day saying that from the teacher saying that we needed a parent teacher conference, kind of an emergency.
mm,
And I was so surprised because she was a model student,
yeah.
perfect little kid. We went in and she said, I really think that she has some learning deficiencies because she's having a hard time grasping some of the things we're talking about in class. And I'm like, okay, tell me more about this.
Mm,
She went on to say that she had no concept of US currency, no concept of presidents. And, I started realizing, and so I started laughing and I said, oh no, she's fine. We just moved from India. So of course she doesn't know those things.
yeah.
And the teacher said, she's never once brought that up.
Oh,
This child,
yeah.
her whole childhood had been spent in Asia, and she hadn't brought it up. So knowing that, looking back, I wish, and I tell people all the time, talk to your kids about what is the boundaries around sharing. Should they say they've just moved from Uganda? Should they say they've just
Mm.
left the Congo? Like, I think it's really important to talk about that, so that it can help with that grieving process.
I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you a question, a follow-up question to that. With kids, did you have, or do you now have more resources for how to help your kids grieve well when they leave? Because obviously they're going through a major transition as well. Maybe the only friends they've had in their entire lives they've had to leave behind. And so, how do you help your kids go through that process?
Yeah, we joke, and maybe it's not funny, but we really prioritize therapy for our kids,
Yes,
and so we
amen.
always joke that they won't need the therapy because we moved them a lot.
Yeah,
They'll need the therapy because of what they've been exposed to through different cultures and being able to see the world and how we treat or don't treat each other. That's more what they'll need the therapy for.
yeah,
And so I think not taking on the burden of the parental decision of moving, kids are resilient, they will be
yes,
fine. But what we have done is every time we've moved, we bring a little bit of something, not as much now that they're older, but something from the place we're leaving for their bedroom. So
mm,
when we left New Delhi, we bought tiger prints and we had recipes. Oh my
oh
gosh,
yeah,
bring the food, have that be part of your landing.
yeah, that's
We
good.
scoped out, yeah, one of the first things we scope out in new places is where's the closest Asian market. Um, because that is really being able to fill your refrigerator with those things. Um, if they have close friends, I think pen paling is really important. It seems
Yeah,
so obvious. Back when we did this, Skype was just
yeah.
starting. Uh, so
Now we have
that's not always
FaceTime and WhatsApp and all the
yes,
things.
but scheduling some things out, at least for the first couple of months. It goes along with you saying, booking that return trip.
Yeah,
That also, I think, helps a little bit.
yeah.
I also think that music is
Mm,
so healing and helpful. And so we've created playlists. So it might be culturally resonant or it might be um, based on memories that you have. But bringing music from the place that you've left also helps.
yes.
There's a really great song by Alice Merton called No Roots.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the lyrics are I've got no roots, but my home was never on the ground.
Mm,
And then there's a part that says, ask me where I come from, and I'll say a different land. It's the place that changes, but the rest is still the same.
that's beautiful.
And so I think building in music can also be a really great help. And then just a couple more of like tips and tricks. Um, Making your own Venn diagram of sorts. What are the things that remind you of the home that you're leaving? And what are the things that offer access to the new culture so that you can start to assimilate?
Mm,
So that might be favorite restaurants. It might be creating a photo wall, again, with the music playlist. Finding groups. Is there
yes,
a Sudanese, a Sudanese community that you could slot into?
yes.
Um, like those kind of things really, really help bridge that gap between home and the new place.
Yes. Those are such great ideas. I love all of those. It's so true. I remember, when we landed, I remember meeting a Ugandan woman, at a grocery
Mhm.
store at her friend's house. And just talking to her, I just felt so at home.
Yes.
It just made me so happy just to hear her little British accent. I was just like, oh gosh, you just remind me so much of Uganda. And it was great to catch up with her in that way.
Yeah. You also never know when you caught up with her in that way and you got to spend a little time with her. We also never know what we're offering someone else. So, a grocery store is a great example of hearing a dialect or hearing a phrase
Yes.
that you're like, wait a minute, why are you here? You're not supposed to be here. This is not the place you're supposed to be. But that can also offer something to that person, a sense of home or a sense of belonging. You
Yeah,
just never know.
I know. I remember
Yeah.
just greeting her in Swahili, and she was just so excited to talk to somebody.
Yes.
Just a simple
Yes.
greeting. So I wanted to mention this quote that you wrote. I think it was on your blog. It said, "Systems that don't hold space and permission for grieving become depressed places of chronic, unreleased grief. Working with others in your cause brings grief. People change their positions, are promoted, leave jobs. Formal leaders transition away, and those left behind feel abandoned, even lost." And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this organizational structure, that you're in. Maybe you're in a sending organization, and how can you communicate to them clearly your need to leave and, what your capacity is like when it's time? Because I know so many people struggle with that. Like, how do I actually communicate with my sending org? How do I communicate with my supporters, my board members back home? Like, what do I tell them? Are they going to stop supporting me now? And so can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think that it's so important that we talk about this because it is not supposed to be a burden that is borne on the shoulders of the individual. And I think the more that we recognize and acknowledge that people leave, like that is an absolute
Yeah.
reality. It's no different when people die. The better we can treat each other when we acknowledge that. So I really have this big mission in my head that once churches and sending orgs and other missionary organizations start to take on the reality of people leave, we're so excited to send, but we're not as excited and ready to welcome home or to process that leaving. That's where we need to start so that it's not the individual that bears the responsibility. I think that when we think about, a typical job, we onboard so well. There's
Mm-hmm.
balloons, there's a welcome. We make sure that people have lunches with the new people, so that they can feel a part of the team and they can start to get that onboarding going. Offboarding, shit,
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
It's, everyone feels terrible with the offboarding. And I think that, if I think about a sending organization who could replicate, almost mirror, how did you send them to the field in the first place?
Right.
Replicate that when you come back home. I also think there's some parallels. I always recommend that organizations have stay interviews instead of
Mm.
exit interviews. And the stay interviews process is that you understand, how are you doing? Where are we at with what the goals are that you were there to accomplish? And do you feel like you need something different? Do you
Mm-hmm.
need more resources in what you're doing? Is your family okay? And the thing that comes up then is it time to start to wrap this up? And I think about,
Mm.
can you imagine a sitting org having stay interviews all along?
Yeah.
Because then it would make us more able to say, you know what, we are getting burnt out, or my kids are struggling. That offers the opportunity to either have resources that get built around you and offered, or you can start that conversation a little bit more easily to say, I think it might be time to wrap up. The other thing I'll say is that there's beauty in being transparent about when it's time to go, because
Mm.
there may be someone else ready to come take your place. And if you don't say it's maybe time to go, that other person, going back to not having that opportunity.
Mm.
Um, so I think, I guess I would mirror kind of corporate world in the stay interview concept, and then replicating the way that we beautifully onboard people. We need
Mm-hmm.
to also think about when we offboard.
Yeah. What are some of the practical things people need to think about communicating to their, churches or board members or families when they're, returning? Like, I know for me, I came home with nothing. We didn't have a house, we didn't have a car, we didn't have, any pots or pans. It's just literally like a few suitcases of some of our stuff from Uganda, but we came home with nothing. And so, how can they communicate to these people back home practically what this is going to look like and what this is going to take and what kind of support they need?
Yeah. I think that again goes back to it being a shared responsibility. And so if someone's listening who is in decision making power at a church, at a sending org, on a board of directors, it is your responsibility to set up that checklist. Exactly what you just said, Sarita, about pots and pans. Have a welcome kit that different
Yeah.
missionaries can borrow when they come back. If you did something amazing for the kiddos when they left, like a backpack full of things, maybe have a
Yeah.
backpack full of things to have their landing be more soft. If you're the individual, I think that it just goes back to that communication. Write down the things that you might think that you'll need,
Yeah.
and just ask in the same way that you would have asked for the community that you were just serving. Ask for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a really beautiful balance that I watched my mom do when she left Kenya, where
Mm.
she said, here's the continuing things that I would like you to continue supporting with the people of Kenya. There was, I
Mm-hmm.
think, three kids that were finishing their schooling. And so you could support them. Here's this opportunity to support. And I also need um, a transition support time. And so
Yeah.
please consider supporting me for another year so that I can get back on my feet, so that I can find a job. All of those things that needed to happen,
Mm.
a little bit of a step back from what we might think people are willing to hear, and just stating very clearly and as plainly as you can that you're going to have some needs as well. It might not be for everyone in your
Mm,
congregation or in the sending org to be able to support that, but someone will. Someone will want to say, yeah, I'll handle
mm,
that and take care of that.
yeah. I know it's almost like you need like a refugee like placement kit, just like a little kit that's ready for you because you do feel like a refugee in many ways. And yeah, I mean, we ended up staying with some friends, like they opened up their home to us, and then we eventually, when my husband got a job, we rented an apartment and finally got a car. But we really didn't have a lot of support when we came back, so it was difficult, But I remember reaching out to some friends and letting them know how hard it was and that I needed support. And it was just nice to be able to talk to someone. But there are so many practical little things, like maybe setting up other kids for your kids' ages, that they can talk to and play with. And just little things
Yes.
that can make someone feel welcome. And I think, like you said, it's really important to ask for those things, not to assume that they're going to happen or feel resentful when they don't, but to actually say, hey, these are going to be our needs, and I'm going to need support for, I need to go to counseling, and I'm going to need to set up a home, and we need to borrow a vehicle, whatever it is. Just set that up ahead of time and know that I think that there are people that want to support, they don't always know how.
Well, and that goes back to talking about grief and loss. None of us ever know what to say when a loved one or a friend is going through grief and loss. And so we awkwardly say, like, let me know how I can help.
Yeah.
That doesn't that doesn't help. And so it's the same kind of a
Yeah.
concept of we're
No.
basically assuming that
Yeah.
people will just say, let me know how I can help. Instead, we could actually create a list. The other practical thing
Right.
that has always worked really beautifully for us is, and this borrows from the moving industry, but they have a first on, a load last, first off box. And so the idea is that the last thing that you load onto your moving truck or your
Mm,
shipping container, then in reverse is the first thing that comes off. And so thinking of that as you're packing up, especially when you've got
yeah.
littles, put something in that last on box that will be first off so that you have some either treasured mementos or
Yeah.
something that reminds them of home. That can also help you create a list of things that you might need other people to do if you can't bring certain things back, or to just set up that first couple of nights. Paper towels, paper
Yeah.
plates, a flashlight, charging cords. It's simple things, but those can go a long
Yeah.
way in helping that
Yeah.
that landing be softer.
Yeah. And churches can set up like a meal train. We have that capacity now to do
Right.
that so they don't have to think about cooking meals. Almost like, yeah, think about like if someone lost a person, like what kinds of things would you do for them? And that's something that churches and sending
Yeah.
organizations and friends and family can do. So, what tools and resources do you recommend for people once they return to their home country, and in air quotes? And is there any recommendations that you might have?
My biggest recommendation is to think of this project of like think of it as a project, the returning home, so that it is more,
Mm,
I don't know what to say, so that it's more of something that you strive towards and not something that's happening to you. We always get a library card. We
yeah,
always get a
have more
library card
control.
as soon as we land. It can help
Yeah.
pass time. It can help be a quiet space. Obviously, you can get books about the place you just left, or you can get books about the place that you've just arrived to. They also often have amazing um, classes and events for getting to know people and meeting people. They always have
Yeah.
toddler story hour. They have knitting classes. They have language classes. The library card is probably the biggest
Yeah.
resource I would recommend.
Yeah.
And then I think about the idea of an art curation. And so there's another episode with a woman named Charlene Lamb who talks
Mm,
about curating your life as you go through transitions. And so that's another practical thing, even though it sounds really silly, but it
mm,
goes back to curating your dinners, making sure that you add a little bit of the new country's food while you're also celebrating the old country's food. And then I think really being open with
yeah.
yourself about what support that you need, whether that's therapy or counseling, um, or a friend group. Meetup is a great place to find people. Facebook,
Yes.
is places that you can find groups. But also know that it's not going to be
Mm-hmm.
magical and all of a sudden you're not going to make new besties. Especially it's
Yeah.
harder, I think, when you land back in your passport country.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, it can feel so overwhelming. There's such a huge laundry list of things that you have to get done when you first move. And it really helped me to make little like to do lists and just to be really realistic with
Yeah.
myself about what I could actually get done that day. So maybe that first day is like, okay, I'm going to, look online at Craigslist for an apartment, or today I'm just going to,
Yeah.
renew my driver's license, or, like just today I'm, gonna meet up with a friend for coffee, or just little things. And also, it was really important just to really take care of my body and soul during that time. So I was making sure that I was moving, I was walking, I was running, I was doing yoga, meditating, breathing, because it can feel,
Yeah.
you can feel panicked, because it can feel so overwhelming, all the things that you have to get done, all the things that you don't have. On top of the grief, of missing the place that you just left. And so I think just to break it down into really
Yeah.
small, like itty bitty tasks, and having so much great grace for yourself, realizing that you are in this grief process. And so you don't need to just jump back into the next thing, another
Right.
ministry, a volunteer position, really giving yourself
Yes.
time to rest, and like, I remember I didn't do any other ministry, I think, for several years. Like, I just felt like I was so burned out, and we landed in Redding, California. We went to Bethel, and like that was really like a watering hole for us, and landing in a place that feels good to you, where you're going to have support. Sometimes people feel like they have to go back where their family is, but sometimes your family may not be the best support system for you. So like really thinking about where you're going to land, like, can I land in a place where there's a really supportive church, or a really supportive community that understands missions and ministry, and like you said, all the online spaces. There's Facebook groups now,
Right.
for missionaries and expats and reentry, and there's tons of really great resources. Shauna Ingram has some on her website. Melissa Chaplin has Returning Well, like workbook, and like going through that workbook with another friend or another missionary, a global worker, expat that's been through your experience, and maybe finding some friends that have some experience living overseas. So it was really helpful to me not just to be
Yes.
around my friends who had never left the country before, but just like I would call my friends that had lived in
Yes.
Congo and lived in Afghanistan, and I would just be like,
Our
okay, like this is what I'm
our
going through. I'm
oldest,
so
actually,
frustrated.
he was in his high school years when we were overseas, and he, for the longest time, would ask new people that he would meet if they had a passport. And that was his determining factor of whether he wanted to be friends with them. And it
Yeah,
really did serve him well, because there was
totally.
an ease in those relationships that came so much quicker because he didn't have to explain himself. I think the other thing that I would say, as you were talking
Yeah.
about that too, it reminded me back to the Worthy Work notebook. Keep a note of what you're accomplishing, because it can add up. It'll add up the more that you see. Today, I got my driver's license. That's
Mm,
huge. It's a really, really big thing. And to help
yeah.
remind yourself of all of the good work that you're accomplishing as you transition back.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing I started doing when we came back, because I was feeling really depressed, was I just started this gratitude jar, where I would just every day, I would just like write one thing on a little small piece of paper, and I'd rip it up and put it in my gratitude jar. And then at the end of the year, I would take out all the little notes, and I would just read them, and I would see all the little things, that had been good about my new life. Like, oh, today I went through a walk, in the forest, and I smelled the crisp leaves, or I got to have, lunch with a friend, or I read a new book, or just things that I just hadn't given myself the time to do when I lived overseas. And one actually really helpful book for me was The Artist's Way, which was just, it's all about sort of like taking yourself on dates, and really, it's more than just creativity. It's really like a space to kind of get to know yourself again, and this new identity that is forming. And I would just, read that book, and then I would take myself to like a little bookstore or something, and I would just do these little things that felt nourishing to me, and that was super helpful in my
There's
process.
also, Julia has written also The Artist Way for Retirees, which is a beautiful, also kind
Oh,
of companion
nice.
to that. And I think the last thing I would say is, the more of us that talk about this as something that is normal and that happens to everyone, the more support that I think that we can start on the front end from sending orgs and from churches and from those that want the best for us as we are in the mission field, the more conversation that we can have about what does it mean to bring someone home and bring someone home well is really what's important. So I'm so glad that you're opening up the conversation to having talk about this the way that it is a reality. The other thing I will say is the more of us that talk about the failures of it and the hard of it is also really important, and not just gloss over like, we did it, we're back, we did these things and it's great, but also talk about the hard stuff, because that helps others know, again, that they're not alone.
Yeah. Do you have any encouragement that you'd like to leave with our listeners, about this identity shifting time for them? Is there anything that you'd like for them to know?
I think the most important thing is going back to the concept of trusting your gut. You know when it is time to go, just like you knew when it was time to go in the first place. I also think that there is such beauty and such a tapestry that gets woven because of our experiences, and going home is part of it. I think a lot of times we look at going home as potentially a failure, or if it's out of our control. And there can be joy in going home. But I think you hit on it really well. The biggest part of it is grace. You have to have grace for yourself. You have to offer grace to those that are making this move with you. And also offer grace to the folks that you're going to be landing next to, who might not have ever left in the first place. That was one of my biggest lessons. Me
too. I had like zero grace for people that just never went anywhere.
Tolerance through all of this. I think trust your gut, have grace for yourself, and try and appreciate the fact that leaving is part of the process.
Yeah, I think that's so right, in the sense that, I felt like when I came back, I had to look for the gifts. I had to look for the gifts of this new experience, because at first I couldn't see it. It just felt like failure, and it felt like not what I wanted. And so the gift of being closer to my family, being there for things that I had missed. When I was overseas, I missed my grandmother's funeral, and so being able to be there for these important events, oh, my sister had a baby, I can actually be there, and just looking for the gifts of this new life, because regardless of whether or not you wanted to leave, you're here now, and God has purposed it in some way. We may not see the purpose at first, but there is purpose in it, and there's a reason, even if that reason is simply letting him love on you and letting you take care of yourself, even if that's, it was hard for me to let that be enough, but that really is enough, because you are enough, whether you're serving overseas or you're in America, like, you're still enough. And so I hope that our listeners can know that. So, well, Naomi, this has been such a gorgeous conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you. You have so many insights, and I want people to be able to connect with you. So if they want to connect around this concept of leaving well, how can they find you?
Yeah. So the best place to find me is my website, which is naomihattaway.com. There is a beautiful quiz there, and you don't have to add your email list, but it tells you what kind of workplace transition archetype you are. And so that can easily be translated to what kind of mission field transition archetype you have.
That's great.
And that's naomihattaway.com/quiz. Podcast, my book, all the things can be found there.
And you have a great podcast too, which
you.
I've enjoyed. Yeah. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on www.saritahearts.com. And on there, I also have a free giveaway, which is a book all about reentry. So if this is something you're going through or about to go through, definitely pick that up. And Naomi, I definitely hope that we get to chat again soon. This has been lovely.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.